He walked into the courtroom wearing a borrowed suit 2 sizes too big. No lawyer, no family, no chance. The judge smirked before he even spoke. Reporters whispered, cameras rolled. Everyone thought it was over before it began. But what they didn't know was that this quiet teenager wasn't the victim they thought he was. He was holding a secret that would flip the entire courtroom upside down. By the time he opened his mouth, the laughter stopped, and the truth began to burn. For most people, courtrooms are intimidating. But for 19-year-old Jalen Dawson, this place had always felt like a distant dream, one he was never supposed to step into from the defendant's side. He had grown up watching trials online, memorizing arguments, studying human behavior like it was an instinct. His friends joked that he was born for the courtroom, but that day, when he walked into one wearing handcuffs, the joke felt cruel. The gallery whispered as he entered. A teenager, barely a man, accused of hacking a local government database. The charges carried years in prison. The judge, an older man with cold eyes and a polished gavel, had already made up his mind. To him, Jalen was just another reckless kid who thought he was smarter than the system. The prosecutor smiled confidently. The evidence looked airtight. Digital trails, login records, screenshots. Even the jury seemed distant. Jalen had no lawyer, no money, and no one to defend him. Just his calm eyes, and a small notebook he carried everywhere. When the judge asked if he understood the charges, Jalen nodded. But there was something in his expression, quiet, unshaken, that made even the bailiff glance twice. He didn't seem scared, he seemed ready. He had spent months in a small apartment studying legal cases, reading court transcripts, learning the rules of evidence. What no one in that courtroom knew was that Jalen wasn't just another accused kid. He had come prepared to defend himself. As the proceedings began, the judge sighed impatiently. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. But Jalen just adjusted his tie, flipped open his notebook, and whispered under his breath, "Time to make them see the truth." As the trial began, the prosecutor wasted no time. He painted Jalen as a cyber criminal, someone who thought he could outsmart the law. The jury nodded along, already convinced. Lines of code were displayed on a projector. Digital fingerprints that supposedly linked straight to Jalen's laptop. But Jalen just watched quietly. Every time the prosecutor made a claim, Jalen scribbled a note. The judge noticed his composure but dismissed it as arrogance. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge asked if Jalen wished to speak in his defense. The courtroom fell silent. People expected stammers, excuses, maybe tears. But instead, Jalen stood tall, straightened his jacket, and walked to the center of the courtroom with the calm confidence of someone twice his age. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady but sharp, "I'd like to cross-examine the evidence." The prosecutor laughed. "This isn't a classroom, son," but Jalen continued. "If I may, I'd like to prove that the evidence presented here isn't just weak. It's fabricated." Gasps filled the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Jalen pulled out a folder from his small backpack. Inside were printed logs, timestamps, and metadata files. "These," he said, "are copies of the original system files from the city's database. Files that anyone could have accessed publicly. Notice the time difference?" He pointed to the screen where the prosecution's timestamps didn't align with the official system's clock. "If I was logged in when you said, how was I also logged into my university system 40 miles away at the exact same minute?" The room fell still. The prosecutor's confident smile cracked. Jalen wasn't done. He showed emails that had been altered. IP addresses rerouted through servers that didn't even exist in his state. He explained it all with such clarity that even the jury, who knew nothing about technology, started to see the truth unfold before their eyes. By the time he finished, murmurs filled the courtroom. The young man everyone dismissed as a criminal had just debunked the entire case live, without an attorney. The judge tried to maintain order, tapping his gavel. "Mr. Dawson, are you suggesting tampering with evidence?" Jalen looked straight at him. "I'm not suggesting it, Your Honor, I'm proving it." That line hit like lightning. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and the prosecutor's assistant began flipping through their notes in panic. Then, Jalen did something bold. He requested access to the prosecution's laptop logs for verification. The judge hesitated but granted it, unable to deny the logic. Within minutes, the truth began to unravel. The main piece of evidence had been planted through an unsecured network. The courtroom exploded into chaos. The prosecutor protested. The judge called for order, and Jalen just stood there and calm, collected, and almost relieved. He wasn't done yet. Looking around at the faces that once doubted him, Jalen said quietly, "Sometimes justice isn't about who has the power. It's about who has the proof." And at that moment, everyone realized this young man wasn't just defending himself. He was exposing a system built to break people like him. The courtroom was silent, too silent. Only the ticking of the clock echoed through the heavy air. Judge Marston adjusted his glasses, staring down at Jalen. "Mr. Dawson," he said sternly, "are you accusing the prosecution of tampering with federal evidence?" Jalen's voice didn't tremble. "I'm not accusing, Your Honor. I'm exposing." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready. The prosecutor's face flushed red. "This is absurd," he barked. "The defendant is making wild accusations without proof." But Jalen didn't flinch. He stepped toward the projector, connecting a USB drive from his backpack. "Then let's check the proof together." The screen flickered. Suddenly, lines of code appeared. Timestamps, file access logs, and internal emails. "These are digital traces," Jalen explained. "They show when the files were modified, who accessed them, and from where." The judge frowned. "And what are we looking at exactly?" Jalen pointed. "Right there. That IP address, 172.2619.4. That's the city prosecutor's office server. And look at the time. The data was modified after I was already in custody." Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor jumped up. "That's a lie. Sit down, counselor," the judge snapped. "Let him finish." Jalen turned to the audience, his tone sharp but calm. "Someone tried to make me look guilty by planting code under my username. But they forgot one thing: metadata never lies." He zoomed in on the logs. "The person who accessed that system didn't just use my credentials, they used a VPN. A government-issued one, tied to a machine registered to your office, Mr. Hale." The prosecutor's mouth opened, but no words came out. His assistant froze, eyes wide. The crowd began whispering, phones recording every second. The judge leaned forward, his voice quieter now, almost shaken. "Mr. Dawson, are you telling this court the prosecution's evidence was fabricated from within their own system?" Jalen looked him dead in the eyes. "I'm not telling you, Your Honor. The evidence is..." Silence. Then chaos. Reporters rushed out of the courtroom, typing furiously. The jury members exchanged stunned glances. The prosecutor slammed his fist on the table, demanding to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the uproar. The judge banged the gavel. "Order, order." He turned to Jalen again, but this time his tone had changed completely. "Mr. Dawson." "Who are you really?" Jalen paused, then reached into his folder and pulled out a letter. Crisp, official, embossed with the state seal. "I'm a law student, Your Honor, top of my class. I was working with a nonprofit on a cybersecurity reform project. The same project that uncovered this data breach 6 months ago." The courtroom froze. Even the judge's face softened. Jalen continued, "I was framed because I exposed vulnerabilities in their system. I didn't hack it, I fixed it." A beat of silence. Then, the judge slowly removed his glasses, his voice heavy. "This case is dismissed," gasps again. The gavel came down hard. Bang! The prosecutor shouted in protest, but it was over. Jalen stood still, closing his eyes for a moment, not in triumph, but in peace. As he turned to leave, reporters flooded him with questions. "Jalen, how did you do it? What's next for you?" He smiled faintly. "I didn't come here to win," he said quietly. "I came here to show that truth doesn't need a lawyer. It just needs a voice." And as he walked out of that courtroom, the same room that once mocked him, everyone knew they'd just witnessed something history would never forget. Outside the courthouse, the world had already changed. Cameras flashed like lightning, microphones swarmed toward him, and headlines began to spread faster than wildfire. Teen defends himself in court and exposes corruption live. Judge apologizes after student proves his own innocence. Jalen stood at the top of the courthouse steps, the afternoon sun hitting his face. For the first time in months, he could breathe freely. But when a reporter asked, "How does it feel to prove everyone wrong?" Jalen didn't smile. He looked at the crowd and said softly, "I didn't want to prove them wrong. I wanted to prove that the system can be right, if we make it." His words hit deeper than any headline. The crowd went silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause. He walked down the steps slowly, the same steps he had climbed in handcuffs just days ago. A few jurors stood outside too. One of them, an older woman, wiped her eyes and whispered, "Don't ever stop fighting, son." Jalen nodded, clutching his small backpack. Inside was the same notebook he had carried since the beginning, filled with notes, quotes, and dreams. He flipped it open to the first page where he'd written months ago, "Justice isn't given. It's learned, lived, and fought for." As he walked away, his phone buzzed. A message popped up and from a national law firm. "We saw your case. Call us. We want you on our team." Jalen smiled for the first time that day. He didn't see it as a victory, he saw it as a beginning. The screen fades to black. A soft piano plays in the background. Because sometimes the system doesn't need another lawyer. It needs someone brave enough to tell the truth, even when no one's listening.